Hello, everybody. Welcome to Ad America. My name is Aninda, one of the guests here in Ad America, and we welcome our audience joining us online. If you're new here, Ad America is the U.S. Embassy's American Center, and our mission is to provide a space for young Indonesians to learn more about the United States. On this event, we'll be continuing our session on intensive academic writing, master the basics with top professors. But before we begin, I would love to share a fun fact with you. The fun fact is academic writing has 8 characteristics: complexity, formality, precision, objectivity, explicitness, accuracy, hedging, and responsibility. That was the fun fact related to academic writing. But if you have more fun fact related to academic writing, feel free to share with us on the chat box or our social media. So, without further ado, let me introduce you to our facilitator today, Mika Pfizer, a research fellow of East West Center, and our co-facilitator, Melissa Cindy Astika Arianto, the Writing Center tutor at Institute Technology 10 November. To our facilitator and co-facilitator, the time is yours.
Hi everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me. My name is Melissa Siddastika and I'm a writing tutor at the Academic Writing Center of Institute Technology 10 November Surabaya. The Writing Center itself is an association with the Regional English Language Office, US Embassy Jakarta. So it is really great to be here and thank you for the opportunity. Today, I will be the co-facilitator for Bapak Mika Fisher. Today, we will discuss editing and academic writing process. And I hope we will have a great time. So let me give the virtual microphone to Bapak Mika, please.
Great, thank you very much. I was with you last week, and I hope we have some returning participants. I'm going to share my screen. Bear with me one moment. Can you see my screen in the full screen mode?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Again, it's really great to be with you all, and I'm just so thrilled to know that people are interested in improving their writing skills. And it's been an amazing series, right? We're at session 8 this week. Today, we're going to be talking about editing, a really, really challenging issue to talk about, actually. It was very difficult for me to prepare the materials today, and I really want it to be interactive. So I'm hopeful that you brought your own writing examples. Last week, we talked about argumentation, which is a critical topic. And today, I hope that we have some opportunity to engage with your ideas. I hope that you brought some writing of your own, right? If there's a paragraph you want to engage on, I've added some time into my presentation so that we can share a little bit, so that I can hear from you what some of your challenges are. Maybe we can do some real-time editing just to really highlight some key issues here today. Okay, so my name is Micah Fisher. I work at the East West Center, which is in Honolulu, Hawaii. Um, We build relationships between East and West. I also, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. I want to do a reintroduction for those that weren't here, because I think there's some really great opportunities for those who may want to continue their studies, their graduate studies, or to join in a professional program in the United States. I also have an affiliation with the University of Hawaii, so the kind of editing that you're going to be hearing about today is from a specific academic tradition background. I'm a social scientist. I've worked a lot with natural scientists. So I do a lot of editing for all sorts of disciplines. But for myself, when I really engage deeply in my own writing, it's generally associated with the social sciences and the environmental sciences in particular. I also have an affiliation at Universitas Hasanuddin in Makassar. So this is in the forestry department. We have a really, really exciting group. We've established a journal called Forest and Society. So for anybody interested in continuing to conduct research on anywhere in Southeast Asia, please consider us to submit your own writing too. Very briefly then about the East-West Center, we are located kind of in the middle of the Pacific, if you've seen where Hawaii is located, and we have lots of programs for academic and professional initiatives. And I really do hope you check out our website and really think about the opportunities here. There's lots of graduate student programs. We have more than 250 students currently across all different countries of the Asia Pacific and the United States. And it's really, really engaging program. So think about us when you're applying for graduate school. Okay, very quick introduction. Those are things that I need to say because I hope that your excitement for writing really, really continues and that you think about pursuing graduate school. For those already in graduate school, there's lots of different programs that we could potentially work together in. So I want to start just transitioning from last week, right? We talked about argumentation. And we talked about this overall heuristic. Heuristic is like kerangka berpikir, right? So this framework of thinking about key questions that you need to really answer in an abstract throughout your academic article, as well as what I use as a reviewer to make sure that a abstract or that an academic article fulfills kind of the rigor for publication. So I'll just go through those very briefly. The first is when you think about your abstract, when you think about your paper, your topic, you really want to think about the purpose. And I think of that in two parts, right? First is really situating why it matters, right? The fundamental building blocks of science and research is to take on a topic that is of importance, right? A lot of people tend to think of just novelty, kebaruan. But really what this is about is addressing an issue that is timely, that is important, something that we need to understand more about. And really associated with that, the second question here is what is the research question, right? And we talked last week in the argumentation session about the challenges of developing a research question, how important it is. Having a good research question really, really determines the extent to which you will be successful in conducting your own research. Then there's the three, I divide them into three questions. These can be combined about methods, right? What is the framework? What data are you using? And how did you do the research methods? And sometimes these are combined, which is fine. But I put these out here because they're the precursors of editing, right? Usually when we write the first time, the first draft, we kind of just write what we're thinking and we write as much as we can. And it's not always very structured. We're trying to get words on paper and the ideas jump into our head. We haven't really thought about it, but the magic really happens during the editing process. And while you're editing, when you think of the entire outline, the entire structure of your paper, you need to make sure that an academic article fits into it ensures that all 7 questions here, and I'll show you that one is repetitive here, right? So the methods, what is the framework, right? Kerangka berpikir, what is the data? What did you do for the research, right? How many interviews did you do, or what data was collected, and how you did the process of analysis? And then the findings, right? What did you find? And we talked last week about not overdoing it. When you have findings for a journal article, you tend to really want to make one key argument. And a lot of junior researchers or people just getting used to the writing process, or especially in thesis, in the scriptsy process in Indonesia, I've noticed that people want to do so much, and the background tells the story of everything, and I'm going to take on everything. But there's this really important process where you have a methodology, a structure, a question, and then you provide a very, very clear answer that helps us to develop our thinking about an issue. So that's the findings. And then I always encourage people to end on this seventh question, which is the same as the first question. Return to the so what question, right? So what? So if you're writing an abstract, when I write an abstract, I use these 7 questions, and I generally write 1 or 2 sentences for each question. Usually you get 200, 250 words, and it's a really nice approach to writing an academic article. And it also maps directly into your outline. So when you approach your outlining process, make sure that these parts are connected, right? A lot of times I read a research article at the beginning. The research question is asking about a specific issue, and then the findings are sometimes not directly connected, or the methodology doesn't lead us from the question to the findings. So making these connections across each of these questions is really, really important. Okay, so that's the introduction of my presentation today. Reviewing what happened last week, thinking about what are the core building blocks of writing. And what I wanted to do today is give you some resources, right? If you're going to Google editing, there's all these things that I found, and it's a little bit confusing, right? How do you edit? A lot of times people are trying to sell you editing services. But the important thing is, I'm gonna show you some books that have been useful to me in the past, so that you have your own resources, and give you just an overall introduction about key issues related to editing. So this was a really good book for me, and why this book is so interesting. Houston, we have a narrative. Why science needs story. It talks about a scientist, a biological scientist, this person, Randy Olson, who went to Hollywood, wanted to become a filmmaker, and talks about how science, who do these really interesting things, who tell these stories that matter, why can we not connect these issues that we're all studying with a broader public, with greater relevance? How do we connect those issues more clearly? And I think it's a really good resource, and it really talks about how to tell better and more memorable stories. It talks about how to build narrative. It gives you examples of how to do this, the ABT method, right? So structures for you to pursue while you write and while you edit, to show what will keep people interested in what you're writing, right? So just a little bit of background. You don't have to read this book. I'm not telling you to read this book. It's not necessarily what you need as an academic, especially wanting to write academic articles. But last week I introduced lots of different types of books about writing. And so what I'm going to engage in today is different books that help us to think about editing. So let's get a key difference out of the way. And many people define these things differently. Some people talk about proofreading, some people talking about editing. Does anybody kind of know the difference? Can somebody put in the chat, maybe, if you want to participate here? Tell me, what is the difference between proofreading and editing? Okay, so I already kind of give the answer here, right, on the screen. Proofreading is about following the rules, right? It's about making sure that things are said in a right way that doesn't trip people up. It's about making your spelling, make sure it makes sense. It's usually the last thing that happens before before publication, right? Some people call this is related to copy editing, but proofreading is getting somebody to look through and make sure that things make sense. Now, editing is a little bit more complicated, right? Editing looks at the entire process, right? For me, editing really starts after the first draft, right? You write a first draft, and after, and sometimes even in the first draft, you're already going back and editing, making sure everything makes sense. But editing is 90% of the paper, even more, I would say, because when you write the first draft, everything is about editing it, right? the outlining, the fixing, the moving things around, the making sure that, so for me, that all falls into this complex and very difficult process called editing. It's really where the magic happens, right? Usually a first draft has, sometimes they're pretty good ideas, but usually the rigor, the depth, the complexity happens throughout the editing process. So I put this book here. This is something that most people, and I put this up to as a resource. And usually this book is been around all over the place. It's very easy to access, very, very reasonable. And it's kind of the gold standard for making sure that your writing looks good, right? It gives you the rules between passive and active voice. It gives you these grammatical hints. It tells you about how to do things. And I would say that proofreaders really hold on to this to make sure that. So there's this chapter in this book, Writing for Social Scientists, and this from Howard Becker, and he talks about this process called editing by ear. And for those that don't do it already, when you read something, when you read it out loud, I personally tend to remember it better, right? So maybe if you're in public and you're reading things out loud, people might think you're crazy. But if you have an opportunity to read things out loud, it helps you to really perform it out, to think it out, to make sure that you're remembering the key points. And it is really good practice that when you start editing, you begin to read it out loud. And for those who maybe aren't English speakers as a first language, reading things out loud, reading your writing out loud really can help you to make sure that things are sounding good, right? And the first thing that I want to say here is that, the creativity that I talked about associated with editing, it doesn't happen when you follow the rules, right? It's not the second point here. It's not an algorithm. Writing, creating things as writing requires a lot of creativity, right? How you structure every single word that you put together, it's impossible to have a rule about that, right? If you have a rule about it, that's a mathematical formula, right? But writing is taking all these different things from your observations, from how you do things, from what you're noticing. It's a constant process of discovery. So you can have heuristics, you can have frameworks, you can have approaches to doing writing, but really it's an artistic process where it's like a painting, right? We make a painting. Sometimes you think what a painting looks good might not end up looking good. It really depends on what you see, what you feel, how it changes you, how it helps you to remember. So there's a lot of creativity that is associated with writing. And the easiest way to check whether your writing sounds good is by your ear, right? What sounds good? When you read it out loud, does it really convey the kind of message that you want to show? And, you know, there's a saying, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And when you go to an art gallery and you see a painting, you may think that this is good. Somebody else may think that it's not. So when you're doing your writing, if I'm writing for the Journal of Conservation Society, for example, I'm imagining my audience very, very much related to people who are interested in conservation and the social aspects of conservation. So I know what kind of research that they've read. I know what they want to learn. I know what other people have written. So I'm writing to that audience. So it's really important that you know who's going to be reading your writing. If you're writing to a journal of Southeast Asian studies, that's a very different scope, right? We're not talking about literature from Africa and Latin America, or Europe or Australia. We're talking about people with a very specific scope. And the way you write needs to be rooted in your understanding and depth of understanding in that literature. So imagining the audience is key. And so by doing the kind of background work, the reading, that's what makes you a good editor, right? It's because you start to very quickly understand this is what they want to hear. This is what will have an influence. This is what will resonate. This is how I need to be writing. Okay, continued. Everybody has heard about the issue of active versus passive voice. And there's many, many resources online. I don't think it's necessarily appropriate for me to go into very much detail here about that issue. So I'm going to just be very, very brief on this issue, right? Here's an example from my research. I researched the human dimensions of environmental change. I'm really interested in processes of, for example, flooding in Jakarta. So here's a basic census, right? It is said that Jakarta floods are due to social, environmental, and climate change. Sounds like a pretty good sentence, right? But it immediately makes us question who is saying that, right? So understanding who is doing what to who, or having these active verbs are essential to improving writing. So you can see here, it is said, that's the verb to be. Are here is another a form of the verb to be. And it really confuses us about what's going on. So to improve the sentence, you could say that Jakarta floods are Jakarta flooding results from social, environmental, and climate change. Have citations next to the social, the environmental, the climate change. The next several sentences talks about the social issues related to flooding. Sentences after that, maybe the environmental, and you lay out the research so you understand the arguments that have been laid out specific to these issues in different contexts. That is as far as I'm going to go on active passive voice. If anybody wants to talk about it some more, we can talk about it. Even in the example that I was trying to make, I had this tendency to go into passive voice. If you didn't, if you heard the way that I was giving the example. So this is very difficult to do, right? And it requires diligence. It requires very close attention to how you're approaching your writing to make sure that you continue to speak in the active voice. And the reason that active voice is so important is because it doesn't leave room for questioning, right? If you use it is said that, if you use these variations of forms to be, it really can be confusing. So it may be clear in your mind about what's happening, but it's not necessarily to the reader. So focusing on a very clear message with an active verb about what is happening is essential to editing in more effective ways. The second principle that I'd offer is use fewer words, right? And this is a place that I think non-English as a first language speakers, so people who are learning English as a second or other language, actually have an easier time of, right? For native speakers, we tend to use a lot of words to explain things because we have a larger vocabulary. We tend to not be clear. We go from all over the place to speak. But people who have learned very, very rigorously how to structure their sentences, how to say certain things, I think of this as an advantage, right? So to use fewer words, shorter sentences that convey clearer concepts is an advantage to people who may not have as strong of a command of the English language. Avoiding repetition in editing, right? A school feels different when it's full of cows compared to when it is full of children, right? You can just get rid of sections of parts of the sentence and it says exactly the same thing. And with less words like that, with less repetition, it also helps people to focus more on the meaning of what you are trying to say. The next key principle that I'd like to offer here is about structure and content. So what do I mean by structure and content? I give two examples. The first is syntax and the second is outline. So when we're talking about syntax, it's really the ordering of words in a given sentence, right? So how it is spoken the most effectively, the most efficiently and the best sounding ways, given the audience that you're speaking to, right? And syntax can be very different because it takes on a cultural element of how a given language is spoken, right? So there's lots of great examples of syntax. It's a really fun topic. We can go into that more if you're interested in that, especially in Indonesia, right? So for example, if you're speaking in Eastern Indonesia, the syntax of a given sentence is very different than if you're saying it in a different part of Indonesia, right? Because of culturally how the structures of ways of saying things have become accustomed to being spoken. The next is outline, which looks at the entirety of the structure or content, right? Does this paragraph go here or should go in a different part of the entire document, right? So what I'm trying to get at this number 4 here is really important about how you create your sentences, but also how you create your paragraphs and where you situate those paragraphs in a given writing. Principle number 5 here is about the concrete and the abstract, right? When you ask somebody, for example, what do you think about the new phenomenon of climate change in Indonesia, right? Well, if I answer you and say, oh, well, it's really interesting. Well, this word interesting means absolutely nothing, right? Interesting could mean actually interesting. Interesting could mean I don't know what you're talking about. Interesting could mean many different things. So that's what I mean by the abstract, right? Yes, it is interesting. And sure, maybe you know what it means to be interesting in this context. But there are much more specific, targeted, concrete ways of saying things, right? The same thing with complex. Well, yes, everything is complex, but how is it complex? It's better to explain how these phenomenon or processes are taking place when you write. And that's where this principle of concrete versus the abstract can really, really invigorate and improve the way that you write and the quality of your writing. Another one is unnecessary metaphors, right? And I think that the English language especially has many of these, right? So I guess Americans like to use a lot of baseball metaphors, right? It's the 7th inning stretch, or all these different types of idioms or different language about that engage in metaphor. Things like cutting edge, or this covers the terrain, or taking the wind out of my sails. There's all these cliches that are often used, and I would suggest that you remove those kind of cliched metaphors when you write. That doesn't mean that metaphors are bad. Metaphors are really, really powerful when they cut to the essence of an idea and help you to think about an issue, right? But it really takes a lot of work to engage in a metaphor in a very specific way. So how do you make these living metaphors that are related to your research? And I would say that most of the academic articles in the social sciences tend to embody some sort of metaphor in their titles or in their overall concepts, because it helps people to really remember what's going on. And there's many, many different excellent examples of this that we can talk about. Okay. We're going through this really fast. I have just a couple more slides, and then I'm hoping that we can have a more of a dialogue here. But I have a couple things I want to say a little bit more about. So first is process, right? How do you become a better editor? How do you not only help to better edit your paper, but how do you begin to notice what writing is bad, right? And it takes a lot of practice, not just in terms of writing, finding time to write, practicing writing about different issues. We talked a lot about plagiarism last week, and you had a special session on plagiarism. But the problem with plagiarism is exactly this issue of practice, right? How do you take an idea, then summarize and really capture what is being conveyed into your writing, and that takes it takes practice, right? What happens in the news today. There's many different forms of writing that you can practice to make sure that you become a better writer. And there's no better way to practice than to emulate those that inspire you, right? If you really like somebody's writing, you keep them in mind when you are approaching your own writing, not to copy them. You want to find your own voice, but you also want to learn from people about the tricks that work, right? Oh, this is how they always make the turn in the story here, or to provoke with a question, to introduce a paradox. All these different approaches to writing will make you a more convincing, a more recognizable writer. Another thing that's really effective, and I would say that the great influencers of the past have really been about writing groups, right? People engaging together about their writing. So these can start really small. And I would say that a lot of the successful academics that I've seen in the past several years are successful because they work together. They work together and say, I'm going to write 500 words every single day. My 500 words is just 1 to 2 paragraphs per day, right? If you commit to that, you can add it up, right? How many days does it take you to get to 10,000 words, which is usually an academic article, right? If you can write 500 words every day, 1,000 words every 2 days, that suggests that within 20 days you can write an academic article, right? If you're just working on word count, right? But working together, having groups where you are accountable to yourself, you share it to other people. Here's another. A lot of people these days are increasingly relying on apps. I don't think they're as successful as writing groups, but any additional advantage by engaging in apps, by working with other people, by getting people who can proofread and edit your work while you're going through it, and to give you comments. It's like I said last week, right? If you want to become a runner, right? If you want to run a marathon, you can't just go out and run a marathon. You have to practice little by little. But if you practice running little by little every day, you'll see the quality and the quantity of your writing improving. So think about it like you're taking on a new hobby like that. And routines are really, really important, right? Whether it's getting up in the morning, the first thing you do, if you like to drink coffee, you drink coffee, but the second thing you do is you begin writing. Those routines, that practice will make you inherently a better editor. It will improve the quality of your writing. So process is really important. I just want to give a couple of different principles to keep in mind, right? When you do the reading out loud, for example, a lot of times flow is really important, right? So how does the words flow when you read it? Does it make me choppy when I read it? Does the cadence get all messed up? Or if you listen to rap music, for example, they're really good at flowing, right? The sentences really mix nicely. And sometimes in writing, that could be a distraction if it flows too much alliteration, too much poetry, too much things like that. But knowing your audience, reading it out loud for flow is really, really important. Another key principle is readability. Is it readable, right? Is it something that if you give it to a friend that maybe knows about these issues, that do they find it readable? Is it boring, right? And a lot of the tricks that I mentioned earlier about cutting down words, about removing repetition, about including active voice, the reason that that's so important for editing is because of this issue of readability, right? Another key principle is clarity. Is it clear, right? When we read a sentence, do we have to go back and read it again and then read it again? And this is why long sentences tend to be bad, right? Where does it start? Where does it end? Where does it go? Generally, you want to have clarity. One sentence, one idea. Next sentence, next idea. They build on each other. There's a flow, there's a structure, there's a coherence to it. Are the last two principles that I put in here. It's just things to keep in mind. Is the structure right when I'm reading this? Does it make sense for the editing? Is it coherent, right? Does it fit together nicely? Finally, I want to give you examples. This is my last, I want to just give you a couple examples. Then we can talk about examples, and then I'll end with something else. I'm at about 32 minutes here, so I'm perfectly on time. But Melissa, you can stop me if I'm going too long, okay? But here's 3 different examples of 3 different paragraphs. When I wrote these paragraphs, they all say the same thing. But you'll notice that when you read them, they convey, right? And this is what I was trying to say at the beginning about how when you write, how you write, who you're trying to reach and influence is based on how you do things. So I'll read these out loud. This is a topic sentence about how to go about writing a paragraph. Okay, opportunities for editing there. It's like 2 times I say the word about. We can condense that, right? This is a topic sentence about writing a first paragraph or writing a paragraph, right? We're editing on the go here, and I'm sorry I can't edit it so that I can show you. Maybe I can. Can I do that? Okay, this is a topic sentence about how to write a paragraph. Okay, are you starting to see how editing works here? Okay, first, an example is helpful. Very clear sentence. Passive voice. How do we change that? First, an example is helpful. First, I will provide an example, right? More clear, more to the point. It's active voice. Then you can have another example. Then I can try to convince you with another example, right? So now it's saying the same thing, but it's starting to edit in a way that is more focused on what I want to tell you here. And part of it is that I am changing away from the passive voice so that you will remember this sentence more clearly. Okay, example. I mean, this is very basic stuff, but I just want to show you the process that editing goes through. Maybe a third example. Then you can try to. Then I can try to convince you with another example. Maybe a third example would be helpful if this is a really compelling issue, right? Maybe a third example helps to make my case compelling, right? There's many options here. The options are endless, and I'm on the spot here, but I just wanted to show you how this works, right? That was my first draft. Here I am trying to improve it. And if after I finish reading this paragraph and I go for a walk for 30 minutes, and then I come back and I sit down, more ideas will start to happen. The paragraph will get to be better. I will be more strategic because I've moved that much further in improving my writing. You might end the paragraph by summarizing the key point and takeaway. You should also think about structure, keeping in mind the transition to the next paragraph. Keeping in mind transitioning to the next paragraph. Your transition to the next paragraph. Okay? One example of paragraph. Melissa, I'm so happy that you're nodding your head because I hope somebody is listening. Okay, next example. A topic sentence introduces a paragraph. Right? It's exactly the same meaning as the first one, but it's almost completely different. And I'm writing it in a way. You see what I'm trying to do here? This second paragraph, I'm going to say it in as few words as I can because we're really not saying a lot here, right? Topic sentence introduces a paragraph. However, it is a little bit vague to me, right? I actually feel better reading the first paragraph. So maybe I'm trying to be too concise here with what I'm trying to convey, what I imagine the reader is thinking. Topic sentence introduces a paragraph. Then examples help to reinforce the main idea. Okay, so basically what I've done is I have combined all of this into one small sentence that says, then examples help to reinforce the main idea. Okay, be convincing, right? Exclamation point. Like when people read that, hopefully it's more memorable. Think about the structure of your larger argument. Transition to the next paragraph, right? Very, very short, only 3 lines, says exactly the same as all of this that I said in the first paragraph. Okay, now I want to try again. Let's do it a different way. I start with a question, right? I really want you to pay attention now. What's the big idea? So the reader thinks, well, what's happening here? Okay, what's the big idea? I read big idea. I want to read the next sentence. What's the big idea? Answer that question when you begin a paragraph, right? It's a totally different way of saying the first sentence of the paragraph should be about a topic sentence, which I did in the first paragraph and then the second paragraph. Then support the idea with a convincing example. Think about your narrative. Then ask yourself, where is this all headed? Another question to ask yourself, was this memorable? Who is your audience and what do you imagine will be memorable to them? Of the examples you provided, which one says it best? In the next paragraph, I will try to wow you. Right? So I'm using colloquialisms. I'm using words like wow that maybe wouldn't be a good word for an academic setting. But what I'm saying here is that when you write your first draft, when you write again your second draft, or when you try to write in a completely different ways, every time you try to engage on it, there's new possibilities. You improve your writing. And this is really what I want to convey today in my message about how you approach editing. Okay. Excellent. Excellent. Thank you, Mario. Excellent example. I'm so delighted to hear that. So I'm going to stop share screen. We are, how far in are we? I don't know. I don't see the time anymore. Stop sharing. I think it was about 35 minutes. So I'm going to stop. I have some more slides. I don't think they're necessary, but let's get into some question and answer. If you want to share some examples with me, please do. I turn it back over to you, Melissa, to facilitate, and I'm happy here to be a resource for your questions about editing.
Thank you so much, Bapak Mika, for the insightful presentations. So just a little bit of recap before our question and answer. I'm sure that a lot of people joining us today still need a little bit more time to ask questions. That's okay. So we just do a little bit of recap. So last week with Bapak Mika, we talked about argumentation, right? And he noted 7 basic questions of an abstract, which in my opinion, they're very important questions that can help us as a writer and can also be your guideline actually in editing your manuscript. So, and thank you so much for the book suggestion, Mika. I'm sure a lot of us will be very interested in reading that book. And there is a very great practice mentioned by Pamika, which is editing by ear. So for those of you who are late, there's this practice called editing by ear to know what sounds good to convey your message to your audience. So you may really want to consider your readers when you write, or the targeted journals if you're writing an academic writing research article. So Bapak Mika also shows us the live editing. I'm sure it's very useful for you to know how the editing actually works. So thank you so much for that, Bapak Mika. So guys, editing is what you begin doing as soon as you finish your first draft, yeah? If I may recap and add, you reread, read for sense, or do a close reading to your draft to see, for example, whether your paper is well organized, or maybe your argument uh, is backed up with evidences, or maybe you want to know if your idea sounds logic and flow logically. In Academic Writing Center, actually, we also separate the editing. There are structural editing and copy editing. So when we deal with structural editing, it might involve checking your argument for structure, for logic and sense. For example, there's once a students and university students who said all living creatures in this world needs electricity, and the consultant will ask, really, all living creatures need electricity? you know or someone will say, this study is the very first study that did this, or it is one and only, a very romantic language. So that's what we call the structural editing. On the other hand, the copy editing might involve checking your writing expressions. So your consultant, for example, will ask you questions to help you clarify your thesis, expand the analysis of your evidence, and maybe correct your own grammatical errors. But in Writing Center, we don't deal with copy editing, only as far as the structural editing goes. So you can edit on several levels, everyone. And my suggestion as well, dealing with students in their editing process, is that you can construct your own editing checklist. There are a lot of editing checklists in the internet that you can use to help you, edit your manuscript. You can also have two kinds of checklists. There are structural editing or copy editing checklists. There are a lot of these editing checklists out there that you can use to benefit you and to upgrade your writing in your editing process as well. So that is all of the points that I might want to add, but it was such a great presentation, Pamika. So I see here that we have already some questions from Twitter, YouTube, and Instagram. Should we address them one by one?
Yeah, up to you.
All right. So the first question comes from Keke from Twitter. So he asked, how do I avoid my piece of writing from being over edited? We can edit and we can also be over edited. So how do we avoid it, Pamika?
Well, I that's a really interesting question because I tend to think the opposite. Right? I think that we don't do enough editing. I think worrying about over editing, it happens, but I think that the more editing we do it will produce better quality writing. Um, I don't really understand whether this question is about our own editing ourselves or actually putting it out to somebody to edit for us. And that is really about you and your voice, right? A lot of people who don't have a lot of experience, they give something to an editor, and an editor completely changes the language. And sometimes it doesn't feel good the way they do it. And a lot of people tend to just accept whatever the editor, the outside editor, does to their writing. And I would be careful with that, right? It's about strengthening your own capacity as a writer and your own improvement. So just to accept what an outsider says. Now, generally, people who do editing know a lot about the topic. So you have to take what they say seriously, right? Um, and a lot of this is personal preference. Some people, when they're personally editing their stuff, nothing can be ever good enough, right? So it needs to be better, 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 better all the time. But generally, I think the most common issue is that people don't edit their own stuff enough. People over rely sometimes, paying a lot of money for an external editor in ways that may change the content of what they're trying to convey. So it's really tricky, right? And I think it's context specific. So depending on a case by case, you should really have control over the editing process. And I'm also very careful about that. I'm an editor of a journal, and so I do a lot of editing of people's work. I make sure that it's always done in track changes so that the person understands what changes I'm making. Because I do not, when you're talking about scientific writing, people use very, very precise language. And you need to be careful as an editor not to change the way that people want to convey information. But generally, this is related to proofreading, right? About making sure that the message is clear, making sure that the grammar is right. That kind of editing usually is helpful. But really, really you have to be careful, and you need to see editing as a process of improvement. And if you notice that there's no additional improvement taking place by further edits, that's when I would say is the time to stop. If the quality is getting worse, definitely stop.
Great. Thank you so much for the answer, Bapak Mika. There's actually also one questions, almost the same questions as this one from Mario Pascal. It is on our Zoom meeting. So is there any tips to prevent us from over editing? I'm sure it has been answered. And there is also a concern about using passive sentences and with if it changed to an active sentences. How would you deal with this in your opinion, Papa Mika? Because I'm sure that a lot of us who are, doing a proofreading or editing, there are a lot of people who say, this is passive, change it to active sentence. Or you might use an application out there that asks you to change your passive sentences into active. So when would be the best way to tell that we can use passive or active, Bapak Mika? I think you're still mute, Bapak.
Thanks. So there's a reason why we always tell people, why you hear people say all the time, be active, right? Because it creates simplicity, right? You can't question it, right? When you read passive voice, three different options about who's doing what come into your head, right? Muncul di benak kita, right? And that confuses, right? And that's why people always say, always prefer the active voice because it focuses on becoming more specific. It doesn't leave room up, or it doesn't leave room for confusion or alternative possibilities. And that's the principle behind why we prefer active voice over passive voice. Now, that doesn't mean that it's always true. And Mario Pascal's point here is a really good one. This question about sometimes just because it sounds better, passive voice is better, right? And there's a reason that we speak in passive voice as well. Um, Sometimes it is for the context, right? The clarity of it is actually built into the way that we speak passive voice. Now that's generally very rare. So you should always prioritize active voice. But when you get good at your own writing, sometimes you'll say, this is a place that I need to use passive voice for various reasons. And the thing about passive voice is we're doing it all the time. So it's really trying to reduce the amount of passive voice is why you say that. Now, I know how difficult this is in Indonesian because passive voice is cultural for Indonesia, right? It is impolite to say this person is doing something to this person, even though that's clear, we understand why it means. So Indonesians tend to be very careful, and it lends Indonesian writers to passive voice because of that culture of politeness, about not trying to corner people, not trying to expose something. But if you're trying to be clear and to convey a message and to explain what your findings are, the simplicity, the clarity, the specificity that comes out of speaking in active voice should really, really guide your process. So I'm not saying anybody's wrong here. Passive voice is something that's still a very useful tool, but where you can, you should always try to make things into the active voice so that you can improve clarity and be more convincing in your writing and make it easier for reviewers to accept what you're trying to share.
Thank you so much for the answer, Bapak Mika. So a quick question as well. Would it be also useful to say that, you know, if the subject of the sentence is important, then we can say it in an active voice. But if, for example, the action is more important, like in the methodology sections when we're writing a research, it is the passive that we should use. What do you think?
I don't agree with that. I do not agree that the methods section should use passive voice. I think that in the social sciences in particular, and I know there's specific journals that tell you that, right? I've written for journals that required me to change language into the passive voice because of the way that their journal has worked. It's very rare, but it's true that in certain situations, especially in there's a tradition in the natural sciences and the physical sciences to say things in a passive voice because of objectivity issues. And right, it's not about me, but in the social sciences in particular, if you're doing something, a methodological approach, it is very important to be active, right? I studied this topic in this location, right? It's not, there has been somebody that studied this topic. It's me, right? I went to the field site, I spoke to these people. It's an ethical issue a lot of times, and we could talk a long time about that issue in the social sciences. So I definitely, there's no hard rule on here. Follow what the journal that you're writing to prescribes, and make sure that you know how the language is being structured. And there are conditions where people require you to write, for example, a method section in the passive voice. But I'm going to speak from my own experience and my experience as an editor. I much prefer people to speak in the active voice in the method section for the ethical implications of that research.
I see. Thank you so much for the answer, Bapak Mika. So we have another questions coming from Zoom. This is from Mediaka Febriandila. Hi, Ms. Mika. I have this concern that when I'm in my editing or proofreading process, I feel like it's such a waste to erase the words that I have crafted for hours. And I know exactly this may hinder my editing skills, making my paragraph not concise and effective. Any tips to cope with this? Thank you.
Right. Rugi, right? I spent so many hours. I wrote this thing and I'm going to delete 1,000 words. There's, everybody cites this Mark Twain thing, right? He has a saying that goes something like, I'm sorry I wrote so much. I didn't have time to be concise, right? So this quote really embodies that actually when you get good at writing a lot it becomes easy, right? But finding the right words to really influence the way people think about something, that's where it takes a lot of time. And that's why editing is so, so important. So I would challenge you, I forget the name. Can you tell me the name of the person who asked that question?
Mediaka Febriandila. Mediaka.
Okay, so but Mediaca, I would challenge you to write more, write it from a different perspective. Even in some instances, especially if you're writing grant proposals, right? For my PhD, I had to write 10 different grant proposals. And some of them are from the conservation perspective. Some of them are from the social, critical social science perspective. Some of it was from a geographical perspective. Some of it was some of the spatial sciences. Some was from a conflict resolution. Now, each of those proposals, the research question was still the same, right? But they have to be written in completely different ways for the different audiences, right? To convince the people who are interested in the issues of conflict resolution, of why my research is important, I had to take my entire proposal and begin writing from an entirely fresh, new perspective. And the more that you get practice at doing that, writing something, putting it away, starting again, the better of a writer that you'll become. So I know that you feel that writing something has taken you so much work and effort and so many hours put into doing that. But what will make you a much better writer is making sure that it is as effective as possible in conveying a message. And sometimes, let's think about it this way. Have you ever taken a test where there was a question and you answered the question, and all of a sudden you looked at the question and you realized you were answering the wrong question? Now you have a conundrum, right? Do I keep all these things that are wrong, or do I start all over again, right? So I hope that conveys to you that, what makes good academic writing is rooted in asking really good research questions and then executing the answer to that research question. And sometimes that requires starting the writing process all over again. And sometimes that requires taking a good idea that you had and completely changing it in new ways. Sometimes you get lucky the first time you do it. Wow, this is good. I just have to do a little editing and I'll keep it. But generally, to become a very, very effective academic writer, it requires turning everything upside down sometimes and thinking about them in completely new ways. And last week in the argumentation session, I talked about how writing is the process of analysis, right? People think that writing only happens after you do the research, but the thinking, the analysis, the distillation of the issues is actually happening while you write. You're making discoveries all the time when you write. And that's why it's important to continue to write and write and write and to do it all over again.
Right. Thank you so much for the answer, Papa Mika. So yeah, it is actually a lot of people's concern. Yeah, we have written so many paragraphs, and then suddenly, someone tell us that, oh, this is doesn't sound great, and you need to maybe delete it or craft it in another way. So we feel like, oh my god, I've wasted so many hours in writing this, and then I
Think
need
about
to
it.
delete it.
Think about it this way. Think about it this way. Here's just another way of thinking about it.
Mhm.
I don't know if any of you remember, you write something on a word processor, and then it freezes, and you lost all the work that you did, and then you have to start all over again. Think about that feeling. When you start all over again, you are much more prepared, right? You're frustrated. I have to do this again. But you've also done so many more hours of thinking about it. And by starting all over again, you're much more strategic on how you do that. And I guarantee you'll be able to finish it much more quickly, much more efficiently. You'll be very, very strategic about how you set up your argument. And that's just another way of thinking about the same issue.
Yes, thank you so much, Veronica. So there's this I bring one question from my students actually. In writing center, we also often find a lot of students who say, I cannot do editing by myself. What should I do? Like I'm not good at English either, and I do it in my manuscript using translator. I do, for example, Pamika, if I cannot do editing, I don't understand about editing, and I'm not good in English either. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that sometimes we feel as if the machine can help us or has the answers for us. But those are the quick fixes, right? And the algorithms have gotten so much better. They've gotten so good at identifying things, right? But it still feels a bit disingenuous, right? And I'm not saying don't use them. I can totally see how powerful these programs are. Um, but it's like a short term. It's a short term to a solution to a long term problem, right? It's like it's like when you have let's say you have a really bad issue. Let's say you break your leg, right? I'm sorry. You break your leg and you say, okay, the solution is a band-aid because that'll stop the bleeding right now. But the problem is actually structural, right? You need to fix the bone and you need to make sure that everything heals right. And so there's really no substitute to that process of improvement, the continuing to get better, right? So you can rely on these tools. They're helpful. They help you. But if you begin to over rely on them, then your own development of becoming a better writer, which can take 5, 10, 15 years, right? Somebody who's writing after 40 years of being a writer knows all the tricks and has all these different toolboxes. So you don't want to create a situation where you don't develop into that great writer that you might be capable of, right? Is this thing just for the assignment now? Sure, you may need those things, but don't sidestep, don't overlook, don't mess up the opportunity to fix the larger issue, the bigger opportunities at practice and improvement that you might not otherwise get if you just put a band-aid on the issue.
Right. Thank you so much, Veronica. Yeah, it has been a lot of students' concern actually, especially for those students who say like my English is not really good, but I have to do editing by myself. I don't know what to do. I don't know where to go. You know, yeah, it happens a lot, and I find a lot of students also go through this concern as well.
And I understand, right? So I have the opposite problem, right? I was born and raised in Indonesia. I went to local school, SD Negeri, until fifth grade, like kelas 5 SD. And then I went to America. And I didn't come back to Indonesia until I was 23 years old. And I could still remember how to speak like a 10-year-old, right? And I still could have conversations with people. But what I started to do was I started to read the newspaper every day. I started to make my own vocabulary. I started to, over time, in the jobs that I had when I was working in the tsunami in Aceh, these donor programs, I would start to become the translators because people needed me. And so over time, my capabilities of writing and reading in the Indonesian language, if I didn't go through that process, I would have never been able to learn how to speak Indonesian again in the ways that I wanted to be able to communicate. And I would say it's the same way with writing, right? Especially as a second language, there's these growing pains, there's these really challenging moments of development, but that's what that's where the growth happens, right? And you'll realize that after a while, it's like, oh, I developed how to do that. I can now be able to communicate in these ways. I read more. The more you read, the more you tricks you learn from the best of them, and then try it for yourself, and then you become better and better and better at it.
Right. Thank you so much, Veronica. There is a process and everything, guys. So I think we still have a lot of questions. So I think we can address that first. This one comes from YouTube. So Nina asks, why is editing so important in the writing process? Why is editing so important in the writing process for me?
Hold on, sorry. I was having an issue there. Why is editing so important in the writing process? Because even the best writers, and I've had this experience, right? Some of my favorite writers, when you get into the academic process that I am in, I get to read people's manuscripts and review them, right? And afterwards, I find out sometimes, wow, this is an amazing scholar, but the first draft was really, really bad, right? Um, when it comes to academic writing, and I talked a lot about this last week in argumentation, is that your best ideas, I said it can't be SKS, right? System kaput semalam. It cannot be that, right? Because why can not academic journal articles not be that? It's because you haven't had the time to think through that. You haven't had the opportunity to look at the issue from all these different perspectives. You haven't had the opportunity to collect all the other research that's related to it and to make sense of how you are making new discoveries, right? And that's where editing happens, right? You're doing this process where you might write a first draft, but the editing helps you to organize in a much more convincing way. It helps you to create better arguments. It helps you to identify ways to make your writing more noticeable, more impactful. It helps you to create better narrative, right? These better stories that help you to convey your message. And that magic all happens in the editing process, right? A good idea, right? We all have good ideas. I guarantee you that everybody who is doing a research project on this call, their research is so important, right? Why is it important? Well, the fact that you're researching it means it's something that is really important to you. Now, how do you convince people why that's important? How do you begin to contextualize that? Editing is such an important aspect of all of that.
Right. Thank you so much for the answer, Bapak Mika. Well, yeah, actually, in social sciences, especially those who take English academic writing class, a lot of you might familiar with the writing process. But I myself have worked with many engineers or in sciences. They will just go to a proofreading app after the first draft, and when I say, "Do you know what editing is?" they will say, "What is that? What do I do in editing process? What is that importance?" Because they will think that they do the drafting, then they just need to correct their grammars and that's it. Yeah, so just like what Famika have said before, the magic happen when you do the editing, guys. So do not skip that.
Yeah, it's I get it. If I have a 10,000 word manuscript, how long does it take me to read 10,000 words? For a good academic article, I need at least 1 hour to read the whole thing. And that's to read it. Now, to think about the editing of each paragraph and to make it make sense, the hours that you need to do that, the days, the continued engagement to make it a very, very strong argument, it's really, it's everybody can do it, but it requires that commitment. It requires the time to continue to do it, right? If you try to write 10,000 words right now, and then put it through an editing software, what you're going to get is no improvement of the ideas that you're trying to do. That requires your thinking, and only your thinking alone and the constant improvement of that thinking is what creates a very, very effective research article. And I would say that, A lot of people think that, let's say you do a PhD, a lot of people think that the outcome of their PhD is their dissertation. It's not. What you get out of a PhD is you, right? It's your ability to think. It's your understanding of all these issues. It's your capacity to create new arguments, to ask new and better research questions. That's what you get out of higher education, right? And that's what we should all be striving for. It's about the process, not the product. In because it's your life, right? And it's your life's work, and it allows you to enter into all sorts of conversations that are important to you.
Yes, that's right. So thank you so much for the answer, Baba Mika. We still have another questions. I believe we still have 15 minutes. So one more question from Instagram. I believe Bintang asked this. The question is, how do I learn easy writing? Or maybe writing easily? What do you think, Mika?
Reading and practice. That's the short answer. Reading, practice, writing. Writing, reading.
Okay, thank you. So you need to read a lot. You cannot make an output without having any input, right? So you can read and practice a lot of writing. Okay, the next question is still from Instagram. This is from Mario. What is the editing process in writing? Do you mind to give it a little recap, maybe, Monica?
Well, I tried to simulate it. It wasn't a very good example, right? It was about how to write a paragraph, and I wrote it in 3 different ways. I showed how you might edit it. I showed different ways of writing those paragraphs that might be appropriate for different audiences. So that's what it looks like. That's what it feels like. But sometimes you just need time, right? The best thing that, for me, I try to write, 30 minutes, and then I try to maybe walk away from the computer for a little while. Some people really like to write with pen and paper. They say that that actually helps. There's studies about how that actually improves what you write because it keeps you focused. There's no distractions and things like that. And it's just, it's the oldest technology, right? To have a pen and paper, to write something, and focus on your ideas, and that makes you much more deliberate about what you write, and also it changes the way that you engage in the editing process. So, right, there's a overall approach which I talked a lot about in my presentation today about editing. There's the overall principles that you should keep in mind about clarity, reducing words, coherence, readability, how to approach it, how to create routines. It's, if you're all in a program, if you're all studying in a school, in a university or otherwise, it should be part of your routine, right? The writing and the editing. It's something that you should work on every day, in some capacity. And some days it can be poetry, some days it can be, very specific reading. There's people who have all sorts of rules. Some people use a stopwatch and say, I'm going to write this amount of time a day. And some days it's going to be creating 500 words. Another day it's going to be editing 5 pages, right? So it's different for different people in different contexts. It different things work for different people, so it's really hard to say how editing processes work. But I hope that some of these ideas by Howard Becker that I shared with you about editing by ear resonate with you and how you approach your writing process and the successes that you have. And you know, good writing changes the world, right? It's just, if you're young and interested in making a difference in the world, you know, writing is everything, right? If you work in a job, writing memos is going to be a really important aspect of the work that you do. And learning to become a good editor is going to make you successful in work. Everyone is looking for people who write and communicate things well, right? If I was watching this play the other day called Hamilton, right? In Hamilton, like these ideas of writing changed the world, right? Changed the idea of what America could be. And a lot of those conversations were happening because of different writers trying to convey different philosophies and ideas about what the world should be. When you look at Indonesia, the history of the best writers, who were the ones influencing what the country should be and what the most important ideals are? A lot of that is conveyed through writing. And today, that's obviously undergoing lots of innovation with social media and the different platforms that you write in, but it's still about good writing. It's still about good editing. It's still about telling good stories and communicating in really effective ways. And the added value that research and higher education provides is the ability to ask better questions, to improve the methodologies of how we get information, to ensure accountability in what people are doing and saying and trying to influence. Those are the overall reasons that I would say it's so important to create a process of good writing, getting your ideas on paper, and then making sure you do the hard work of editing it into something that can influence and change the minds of a lot of people.
Thank you, Papa Mika. Right, guys, it is very important to communicate effectively through your writing, and editing process can help you in doing that. And if you are looking for more guideline of editing, for example, there are a lot of editing guideline or questions that you can use for self-editing or even self-proofreading if you want to proofread. And a lot of writing centers in the world has this. The ITS Writing Center also has this. If you want to come to our web page, you can easily access that information. So do not hesitate if you are looking for more information about editing guideline. There are a lot of that on Google, I think, and other writing center resources. So please do check that out. And I think we still have one last concern, Bapak Mika. So this concern is about how to be more straightforward writer as an Indonesian. Maybe you have met a lot of Indonesian students or come up with Indonesian writers, and a lot of concerns goes in and as an Indonesian writers is that usually people will say Indonesian writers go around the bush a lot. They're not straightforward. What do you think about this phenomenon? Oh, yeah.
Indonesians are such incredible storytellers, and the language and the cultural and the history of Indonesia, across Indonesia, wherever you go, is a history of amazing storytelling, right? Uh, all you need to do is look at the wayang kulit or the arjo in Bali or the just everywhere you go, you have these masterful storytellers. So I am going to disagree. Um, just because you don't see Indonesian writers uh, in these positions that other people have is is something that I really want to see changed, right? We need to give more opportunities to Indonesian writers and thinkers and academics to be able to influence how we think about a problem, right? An important research problem. So I'm hoping that the young generation not only can emulate, international standards of research, but to bring your own voice, which has these layers of history and ability of communicating that is rooted in the many languages and cultures of the region. And I'm hoping that that translates into changing how the right, some people call it the arus balik, right, which is a really, really important concept, but to be more seen for the contributions that Indonesian thinking has, especially in the academic world, is really important. So use the strengths that you have that other people might not have, that have made people so interested, or that have made this region such an important a region that has so much depth of knowledge. Use the strengths that you might not know that you have in storytelling to be able to influence broader writing formats. And I encourage everyone to write for the media, write on social media, write in journal articles, write in all sorts of formats and forums that you can think of, because I think Indonesian and young Indonesian writers can have a huge influence on how we tackle the really important issues of the future in ways that other people might not have any understanding of. So I'm really awaiting the arrival of the next generation of great Indonesian writers, and I hope that is you.
Thank you so much, Mika. Well, so guys, do not feel unmotivated in writing. Does not mean that you're bad at it. There are a lot of Indonesian writers also successful at doing what they're doing out there. And just like Pak Mika have said, bring your own voice. Yeah, I think that end our Q&A well. So I give back the virtual microphone to our e-guide on duty today.
Thank you, Pak Maika, and also Mbak Melissa for the insightful session. We hope to collaborate again with you in the near future. So now you may be wondering, you have great ideas and you would like to have it in America. Well, we would love to hear it from you. You can send your event proposals to us on our website at www.america.or.id. Select Create a Program and go to Collaborate with us. All the event proposals will be reviewed and your event might be featured here soon. While you are on our website, make sure to subscribe to our newsletter to get our weekly event updates. You can also find us on social media. We are on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at AT America. You can get fun content, giveaways, and so much more. Also, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Again, thank you for joining us. My name is Aninda, and see you next time. Have a good day, everyone.